Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room Update. We are on day 73 of Israel's war with the terrorists in Gaza. IDF forces continue with their operations in the Gaza Strip, exposing the terrorists, where necessary, killing the terrorists and destroying their terrorist infrastructure. In the last 24 hours, we've seen some substantial updates with the IDF exposing a considerably long tunnel that had been dug by the terrorists from deep within the Gaza Strip towards Israel's border, towards the Erez crossing. This was a huge tunnel that cars could drive through. It must have taken quite a substantial amount of time to dig, and it was very, very well laid out and very, very well fortified, and really a substantial finding. Alongside that, IDF forces discovered also in the house of one of the Hamas leaders in Sajaiya, whilst the Gazan population suffers from terrible poverty. The IDF forces discovered cases containing over 5 million shekel in one of the houses of the Hamas leaders. That's about $1.25 million, possibly even a little bit more than that, just laying around in the house. What we've seen continuing on, obviously, is the operations in the northern area of Gaza against the terrorists and against their infrastructure. Also, as we know, spreading out to the south to Khan Yunis, where central areas of the city have already been taken, and the fighting is carrying on there. What we've seen in Lebanon on the northern front, a continuation of that war of attrition. Hezbollah keeps on firing rockets, anti-tank weapons, and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and has caused considerable damage. And the IDF forces responding there again today quite heavily. On the wider area in Judea and Samaria, also the anti-terror, counter-terror operations have continued on, and yesterday and today we saw 2 consecutive terror attacks. Yesterday, an IDF soldier being stabbed by a terrorist who was quickly apprehended, and then today a drive-by shooting which caused the wounding of an Israeli woman moderately, and that terrorist is still being hunted. On the very much wider picture as well, we've seen the continuation of the Houthis from Yemen trying to disrupt the freedom of navigation, and really the coming together of an international force led by the US, with some 50 naval vessels already in the area and another 40 on the way, to prevent really that major disruption being caused by the Houthis to any ships going through Bab el-Mandeb, through the Strait of Tiran, coming up towards the Suez Canal. So that's the update from the different areas of fighting. We're joined today by our special guest, Colonel in the Reserves, Miri Eisin, who, amongst other things, and amongst her really spectacular military career, is now also the director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism in the Reichman University. And Miri is going to talk about a subject that we already know about, that we've already heard about, and that we have to put into context all the time. And that is the terrorist use of the media, of propaganda, to present their narrative of what's going on, and really to mislead the world to the greatest extent possible. Miri, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very privileged. And what I want to try to share in my analysis, as you said, is to give us a sense, and this isn't about agreeing, this is so that we can better understand. And when you understand better, I think that we can also contend with it better. How in the world are they looking at this event of Hamas genocidal terrorism being an act of resistance? And here I want to talk a bit both about from October 7th and onward. I'm going to do it in short, different breaks. I'm going to start by digging in. We know a lot more today about October 7th as a concept, not just specifically about that day, but about the planning that went behind the Hamas genocidal terror plan, and we're all understanding much more about it now. I want to focus for a moment on a portion of this plan which has not only impacted the way we are impacted here inside Israel, how it has impacted the arena, as mentioned before, the Houthis down in Yemen, let alone Hezbollah, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the different people in and around this area, how it's trickled out this way, but also overwhelmingly this enormous eruption of anti-Semitism worldwide. I want to connect it into Hamas's genocidal mastermind plan that was initiated on October 7th and is continuing. What in the world do I mean by all of these words? So I'm going to say, I don't know how many other people stand up and say it clearly, that I was surprised by October 7th and I was wrong. When I say I was surprised, I wasn't surprised by what Hamas's capacity is. I was surprised a bit by the capability. I was surprised by the overall inaction of the plan. That took me by surprise more because I had been looking at Hezbollah up north. I wasn't looking at Hamas down south. In addition, and I will expand on this in a moment, I was shocked, let alone surprised, by the level of dehumanization that had to be part of the education system within the Gaza Strip to allow thousands of, I still have to call them human beings, to enact the barbaric genocidal crimes they did against people and to do so with glee. So I was surprised, and as I said, I was also wrong. There are certain aspects of Hamas's master plan that to me, I was not surprised by at all. And when it comes to the media manipulation, I would say that's the first and foremost aspect that Hamas has been using for many years. What do I mean? Let me break this down into pieces. On October 7th, when Hamas enacted the genocidal terror attack, when they did so, they were uploading, as we all know, an enormous amount of content onto social media, going around with the GoPros, filming themselves, doing it on Facebook Live, showing them doing the atrocities, claiming them in that sense. And that stage one, which I am going to call the narrative of terror, overwhelmingly, it was focused at us, at those of us who are terrorized by it, who looked at these atrocities, who saw them as they Facebook Lived on people's own Facebook, the people that they were attacking, murdering, torturing, and killing. They uploaded into their own phones the Facebook to show to the families impossible acts of atrocity. And those were done in the Hamas mastermind plan to terrorize all of the Israelis who saw it, all of the Israelis who live in that area, and can I say 10 million Israelis and Israeli supporters worldwide who were absolutely in shock and terrorized by the actions of October 7th. Can you imagine?
I believe Miri was an integral part of the plan, right?
It was an integral,
that was very much a central part even.
I would go so far that the issue to me, Morris, is that somebody planned it, planned the scorched ground, planned the torture, the rape, the horrific barbaric acts, and did so to terrorize. That's at the heart of how you terrorize. What does it have to do with media manipulation? Because the bulk of that content that was uploaded was done towards Israel in that sense. And the bulk of what was uploaded at the time was done in the Arabic, towards the, I'm going to call Middle Eastern, Arabic-speaking world. It was done without the heavy-duty atrocities, meaning they didn't necessarily show those live stream completely. But to me, part of the dehumanizing side is that when they were uploading it already on October 7th and showing it, what were they showing? Everybody breathe in deep. None of you are going to be happy right now. Everything I have to say is very harsh. What do I mean? When they uploaded it, what they were uploading was, I, Hamas, have just humiliated the Israeli. I, Hamas, am powerful, I am resistance, and in that sense, I am doing something which I am proud of. Now just think, not of the gap, of the dehumanizing, of showing the type of humiliation, let alone the atrocities, and to show them as part of a self-narrative that is showing them as being strong, successful, resistance. And the terminology that they used in Arabic, and this afterwards will go worldwide, is that they are attacking those barbaric Israel, the Zionist colonial oppressor. We all know the words themselves, but the issue is that they presented themselves as being strong, as being proud, as humiliating the Israelis. Now, we on the other side, in that terror aspect, are terrorized by the acts themselves, but here comes the twist. And when I say twist, this was pre-planned. By the late night of October 7th, Hamas had carefully taken off social media all of the content that was real atrocities. They kept content that, as far as they're concerned, is only humiliation, which can be bad upon itself. That, the ones that were humiliation, but not necessarily atrocities, though it's hard to see the distinction, they took off by the end of October 8th. Meaning they used it on October 7th, both to terrorize Israel, Israelis, Jews, pro-Israelis, and they put it on for their own, in that sense, strengthening. And I hate the way I'm saying that, but that was done as part of the pre-plan. But even worse, by the end of October 7th, they had taken it all off. Look at what's happened in the last 2.5 months. Israel had the onus on ourselves of having to prove that Hamas did the atrocities. That's part of a master plan in that sense, where they deny. You go, really? That's such clever thinking. And I go, really? That's ABC and propaganda, where you enact something, you do something horrific, you terrorize the one side by the horrific things you side in, but that you've done on the other side, you both enable and strengthen in a horrible way people who view this as being humiliating and strengthening. And as they've called it the entire time, resistance. And hand in hand with that, you take off this enormous social media content, and what you're selling in social media for Hamas from late October 7th is that what we did is an act of resistance against the Israeli oppression, occupation, humiliation, and that what we're doing is nothing compared to what Israel has done to us for, choose your number, 15 years, 35 years, 75 years, 120 years. So I'm talking about a pre-planned, careful media plan of uploading the content and then removing the content, and that's only the first stage.
That's amazing, Miri. It really does show the malice of forethought, not only to envisage this mass invasion of Israel and the massacre, but to ensure that each one of these teams had their GoPros with them, had the ability to then upload that material to, I would assume, some type of a central source that then spread the material around and could also then control taking the materials that were less favorable down from the websites. That really does show meticulous planning.
Meticulous planning, and everybody's always surprised. It's kind of like, really? They're that advanced? And I go, okay, you and I don't think either one of us are in TikTok. And all of us watching us right now, I hope there are a few people, let's say under the age of 25, maybe under the age of 40. And I smile when I say that. But one of the aspects that we don't understand is how much this media focus, the social media focus of both of the uploading and then of taking it away, is done at an age group that lives within the social media to the degree that what they saw in October, again, seeing it in the way that it was seen, they said, yeah, I saw something here and there, but that wasn't the central thing. And you and I go, are you kidding me? And I say that that was part of that plan where you send out a story, you show the story, you do it in 90-second TikTok films with a little bit of music. When I see horrific degradation of human beings, it's going to be shown as humiliation of Israelis who deserve it. And that gap is one that I never want to cross. But I want everybody here to understand that when you're talking to good people who say, I never saw that and I don't believe it, that is part of the aspect of what they brought to the table, meaning they did ABC and propaganda Deny, deny. Have I said it enough? Deny, deny, deny. And look at what happened to the world within a few days or a week, let alone 2.5 months later, that they absolutely were very successful initially. I'll talk again. They haven't been successful all over. But that first stage, definitely we were not prepared. I say we, Israel. Inside my institute, from October 7th, we have everything they uploaded. Can you imagine what the interns at my institute do? I have psychologists for all of them because we kept it all. We're not the only ones in official Israel. Everybody understood that we needed to keep all of that content, not just from the GoPros of the dead terrorists, but also from what they uploaded to show that they did that at the initial stage, that they were proud of it as they showed it in the beginning.
That's amazing. How we've always understood that Hamas really are very, very good at manipulating. All of the terrorist organizations are very, very good at manipulating the press, manipulating the media, and using the capabilities of really social media to the best extent possible, whether it be partial pictures showing only a partial scene. And here what you're describing really is really quite sophisticated, understanding the workings of social media, really for, as you say, for the younger generation, where you see a story for 30 seconds, it's gone the next day. You don't really have the chance to get into it and to understand what exactly you've seen. And so it fleets by very, very quickly. Everything just becomes this momentary experience without really leaving that indelible footprint. But how do you then go back and gather up these materials so that we can then recreate what was both done and broadcast?
So first of all, those materials were collected from the beginning, from October 7th, 6:30. I mean, I can't say 6:30 a.m. in that sense. Most of that material has started to come out 7, 8. There are different research institutes inside Israel within the system itself. And that I say as somebody who comes both from within the intelligence system, the security system, there are those who sat and everybody saved it. So we have it. But now the onus of proof is on me, which is horrific, because I want to give you to a different stage now. As I said, that was stage 1. Is that not bad enough? But I need to get to stage 2. Because stage 2 really, in that sense, has been with us for the last, 10, 11 weeks? I've so lost my sense of time, and it's horrible. I think you said before 73 days in that sense. We've all lost our sense of time in this war. Is that the second stage of this, Morris, is that what Hamas did, and again, this is not new. It's not new, the manipulation. It's not new, the denying. It's not new, uploading and then taking down. That's also part of understanding social media. And half the population, both in the Gaza Strip and in East Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria, is under the age of 25. Half the population throughout the greater Middle East, from Morocco through Pakistan, is under the age of 25. And they all have a phone, social media access. TikTok is the one that works. So they're seeing those 30-second segments. And that's why they have what I'm going to call a lying, perverted, horrific version. But they don't know that. And I know that that sounds terrible. I'm not making this any easier. I'm saying that's part of our challenge, is that they don't know that they're getting such a perverted version. Because the Hamas version not only sits within that social media, but add into it that within that social media success that they had so far, they sit towards the Western world on a completely different framing. Everybody breathe in deep. As I said before, everything I have to say never makes anybody happy. And this, again, is something that they do time and again. Meaning, I, Hamas, I'm not Hamas, right? But I, Hamas, am the resistance against occupation. It's a frame. When I say resistance, look at me. I'm sitting up straighter. I'm strong. I'm powerful. And this terminology of resistance and occupation is Hamas from its establishment in the 1980s, 1987. But the terminology of resistance and occupation has taken on a new life in the Western liberal world in the last 15 years. And again, it's two different things, but it's the same terminology. I know resistance and occupation say people who are very liberal, very progressive. And again, I want to say good people. that have, on the one hand, they're hearing resistance, occupation, so they're with the resistors and those who are against the oppressors. And that framing that has been used by Hamas forever sits onto the back of 75 years of a very clear-cut Palestinian frame, which is the one that we all see in the Western media. And here it's already going to be the things that you know. I've been on Western media day in, day out for the last 73 days, done them all. I won't go on Al Jazeera English. There are those who I can choose not to do so. I won't go on Russia Today. I'm like, really? I don't need that framing. But I do, breathing in deep, go on to BBC. CNN this time has not been as bad as I'm used to. MSNBC, I'm just saying different names of different outlets where the framing is a different kind of framing. And the framing is not only about the resistance against occupation, because I come up and talk about terror, 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 and you can get past that. But the additional framing, which is much more challenging, is those who, from a very, very progressive liberal point of view, look at a war through the eyes of the victim. A war, and I say this harshly, is not about the victims. But in today's day and age, where it's looked at, I say, what is this, like a football team, 20,000 to 2,000? It's a number. It's not about the numbers. It's about ideology, and it's about intent, and it's about a genocidal, murderous terror organization that lives within a population. But the framing that the Hamas build on is that framing of as I said, the resistance against the oppressors. So I have to remind everybody about the terrorism, not just of October 7th, the terrorism that's been continuing until today, December, whatever we are, I lose my sense of time, 18th. But in that sense, it's that gap, because I'm talking to people who put in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I tell them, this isn't about this conflict. This is about a genocidal terror organization that calls for our annihilation. And I just try to go to that point. But I need everybody to realize that in the Western world, certainly in the progressive Western world, the frame that they've seen is of Israel, the occupier. I'm like, really? And, Sderot, known as that occupation city, Netivot, known as the occupation city, let alone all of the cities around Israel. And this doesn't have to do about any of that.
It's amazing how none of that has anything to do with actual occupation. None of these areas that were invaded on October 7 are part of the, as it were, the settlements, are part of that disputed territory, as it's called, whether it be the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. This was an attack on Israel proper, and yet that same terminology is constantly used by Hamas. They're very from that point of view, they're very, very well disciplined in that it doesn't matter what you ask them about. You can ask them about the weather, and the answer will always be like Hanan Ashrawi, the PLO.
She's not Hamas. Let's not make her Hamas.
Exactly. It's the same thing. You can ask what the weather is like in Ramallah, and so, well, in the settlements, it's A, B, C, D. That same framing constantly, and it doesn't really matter to what they're referring, because they're trying to get across that message of we're the resistance against the settlements and the occupation, the buzzwords, which, as you say so rightly, the liberal world has now adopted as, well, this is almost legitimate to resist the occupation, to fight against the settlements. That's something which really has taken a lot of time to create that impression. And it's something which seems to stick, and then you have the world media adopting the same terrorist terminology in order to frame the conflict.
So I'm going to take it in that sense full round, because that's, as I said, things that I was surprised by and things I wasn't surprised by. As we both know, I've been around in the Israeli media front as a spokesperson for many years, and the framing has been the same for the last 35 years. The reason there's violence is because of the occupation. The Palestinian is the victim. And so it becomes how I have to prove that Israel is a victim. You know what, Marcia? I don't want to be a victim. Okay? But add into everything that happened right now that what happened brought out something. If I said a few things surprised me with Hamas's attack, the level of barbarism, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised in hindsight, the magnitude of it, certainly in hindsight understood. But the third thing that surprised me, not the media manipulation, they've done that in the past. The third thing that surprised me was how this, what we're just talking about right now, the oppressors, oppression, the aspect of resistance against occupation, oh my God, how that brought out what I'm going to call worldwide anti-Semitism. And for that anti-Semitism to burst out because it came out because of the framing, it came out because of the terminology, but it came out as anti-Semitism, period. And this isn't about the legitimacy of Israel, of the state. It's like all the different terms that we could use about that. And this surprised me. The level of anti-Semitism that came out in these voices in North America on campuses. This isn't all of the United States. I don't think we're overstating it because it's in a certain age, but it's very harsh. And I go back again, what age is impacted by it? And take note, it's impacted, and we need to realize that, by the Instagram, TikTok age. This is not a social media war, okay? The social media is one of the battlefields. But in that battlefield, Hamas most definitely did, and it did the same thing. It does it every time. And here I'm going to tell you a few things why we do so badly there. Because when we respond, usually we'll say, no, there is no occupation. And I love that conversation, okay, says the military person. There isn't at the Gaza Strip. Judea and Samaria has a different status. It's disputed territory, but the military is an occupied territory. It's very who wants to have that conversation? So we can't talk about that. And when we get into our responses, I've been on TV so many times where I've heard Israelis who are lovely people who are standing on Israel's northern border. And they're talking about the dozens of Israeli communities that have been evacuated because Hezbollah has done a buffer zone into Israel right now, because that's de facto what's happened up north. And Israelis on TV, and well, I shouldn't say things like this when we're talking right now, Israelis on TV will say, I am standing now in the settlement of Manara. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Manara is not a settlement. And I thought, okay, this is about terminology. Because when you say the word settlement nowadays, in international media, it goes hand in hand with Judea and Samaria. It goes hand in hand with occupation, oppression. Again, that's the media framing. But when I call a community that was built in 1943 because of my Hebrew into English a settlement, because when it was established, it was called a settlement. So just think how our own wording, our own terminology add into what we're doing. Words matter. We need to be aware of that in the words that we're using and in the words that we need to use and don't need to use, that context right now of talking about oppression and occupation, right now, all I'm talking about, I say it again, Hamas, not the terror organization, Hamas, the genocidal terror organization. Put those words together. I need people to hear that because this is part of changing the way it's framed so that when you say Hamas, they know genocidal terror. Terror is not enough today. You need more than that.
So one of the subjects that's coming up constantly, Miri, is also not only the manipulation of pictures, but manipulation of stories. We saw yesterday extensive use of a picture on social media of a doctor standing with his from the Kamal Shuan, I think hospital. I forget the name. Kamal Adwan Hospital, standing with his hands up, chest uncovered, and the story being told was that he had been indiscriminately arrested. This poor doctor for doing nothing. When you then see the zoom out, and you see, well, he's holding up in his hands, but what the terrorists have cut off is the fact that he's holding a rifle in his hand and an assault rifle to that. That's part of this manipulation that we see all the time. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, one of the other things that seems to really curry a lot of favor around the world is obviously, and we see this playing out specifically from international leaders, from the US administration, Israel must limit the damage caused and the casualties caused among the civilian population. This is something which I believe in this war, we're seeing at really outrageous proportions toward, even as compared to the previous wars, the inflated numbers of casualties that are just simply really sucked up by by international media, by people who should be more well informed. How can we combat that whole idea of these inflated numbers, of American administration really buying into that, the press buying into that? How do you respond to those claims, which I'm sure you've heard on not a small amount of occasions?
I hear it endlessly. You're not going to necessarily like what I have to say right now, because this to me is about winning the war, even if it may seem for you for a moment, and I'm saying this openly, that it's as if I'm losing a battle. Okay? So let's say it's not 20,000 that were killed in the Gaza Strip. Now, breathe in deep. It was only 10,000. Let's say of the 10,000, 2,000 to 3,000 are terrorists. And I certainly do think that it's 2,000 to 3,000, if not even 4,000. Breathe in deep. That means that 6,000 to 7,000, I did my numbers, not their numbers, 6,000 to 7,000, breathe in deep, civilians who may detest me, hate me, and want to kill me, okay? But 6,000 to 7,000, not fighters, civilians were killed. So what I do is I say every civilian killed is a tragedy. I'm not empathizing with the Palestinians. This isn't about, I think that we've lost a lot of that. But this has to do with the different aspect, which isn't about this war, it's about general ones. The international Western world mainly is against war. By the way, it doesn't matter who does the war. They're against war. And they look at war through the eyes of the victims. That's what I was talking about a bit before. It is, I can't call it a skewed viewpoint. It's kind of like realism versus liberalism in its own way. And that would already be on a psychological or philosophical level. But at the end of the day, civilians have been killed in the Gaza Strip. And what I talk about is two different things. First, I do something that all of the Israelis answered by going, do you know that this is the best statistic that's ever been? People are not statistics. There are civilians who are dead there. If you can bring yourself to say the words that it's terrible when children are killed, and it may be children in the future will want to kill me, they may want to kill me now, but it's terrible when children are killed. You've just changed the response of the person talking to you, of the person listening to you, because it shows that you're not ignoring the issue. The other aspect is constantly reminding everybody that this is a war. Everybody's kind of looking at this as the October 7th attack. Whereas what they started was a war. They started a campaign. The attack on October 7th was the first initial preemptive attack. Okay, they did preemptive, and I don't know preemptive. It's not the right word. Give me a second. My military terms I'll remember in English, because they did the opening act of the war was October 7th. And part of that opening act was scorched ground that I don't want to talk about anymore because we all understand what I'm talking about. That was part of the plan. But part of that plan also was the mass taking of hostages and taking those hostages back into the Gaza Strip and building within the Gaza Strip this subterranean arena that, as you mentioned before, they've put out just one tunnel. I was on TV this morning and somebody said to me, how did we not know about the tunnels? And I was like, are you kidding? We've been talking about the tunnels for the last 15 years. We've been talking about the tunnels for the last 2.5 months. We've been talking about the tunnels all the time. Now you see this video of the tunnel and you're surprised? Excuse me for putting it in those. That's what I actually think I said this morning on TV. I'm like, we all know about it. When you see the visual, it still hits you. So when I look in that sense, I think that what we have is that the international community, and I oppose this, are showing the war through the victims. So they show Israelis also through the victims. And that's not what we're about right now. We're resilient and we're all in trauma. But again, to me, that's how we need to bridge back in, that it isn't, a war is not about the victims. A war is about a genocidal terror organization that attacked us, wants to destroy us, took hostages, and we need to destroy it. And there are casualties on both sides. And it's using the term victims and talking about casualties. And again, everything I said right now is kind of like, the manual of do and not do, but it comes back to our own beliefs. I'm very comfortable in talking in that sense about personal aspects. Most of us, when it comes to the Gazan side, and I'm not going to point any fingers, but I'm on TV all the time, and I'm on panels with other Israelis and all sorts of different things, and they'll immediately go, there's no other military who has ever had less civilian casualties, and that's wonderful, but that doesn't help anybody who's looking at it through the eyes of the victim. But if he had said, it's terrible when children are killed, we try our best to never target civilians, and then would say, and the Israeli military has done the best, already you framed it, but in a slightly different way.
It's giving that framing in the initial part of the answer, that really that show of empathy before, I think for us military people, especially academics and people who study wars. I can tell you that just a few months before the war started, I wrote a paper comparing the number of casualties in Israel's counterterrorism operations in the Gaza Strip compared to Western armies in Iraq, Afghanistan. And really the numbers of people killed are no different here, they're no different there. War is unfortunately one of those situations in which civilians die. There is growing understanding also that more and more civilians die in urban warfare. I think that the statistic that was provided at the time was some 80% of all of the civilian victims died in urban warfare. That's just, as it were, the nature of the beast. And I think that it's sometimes difficult for military personnel without your background of understanding the media, understanding that really that great need to first neutralize the question by that expression of empathy, and not even artificially, truly saying that it's a disaster when children die, when babies die. I don't think anyone who's human could really say anything else. And yet there is that next response. And I think that that's something which is sometimes lacking in big army people who speak very clearly and with authoritative voices on television, as opposed to the more, I would say, experienced spokespeople who really can develop that conversation into a different way. And that's something which, again, on the other side, they're given much more credit, and so they can say anything and it doesn't matter. But when it comes to the Israeli spokesman, everyone's looking at you with a magnifying glass and seeing exactly what word you used. Did you use the word settlement? Did you say, well, we are bombing whenever we see terrorists?
But when you say that in that sense, and I say that to both of us because we're both in this and we understand it and it's important for us. To me, it's like it's not that they're looking, it's about the connotation of the word. Okay, I'll give you just the basic example. Okay, so if I say West Bank, does that mean I have an opinion? If I say Judea and Samaria, does that mean I have an opinion? There is no neutral word. I want to say Judea and Samaria. They're going to say to me West Bank. When I answer Judea and Samaria, they're not listening to me because they know my opinion. They don't know my opinion. That's the word that I use as an Israeli, but I say that because terminology, we have to be aware of it. It's part of the gaps. But I want to come back for a moment to Hamas's media manipulation in that sense, because remember, they are a hybrid terror organization. They are not a state, and that is their advantage. And we need to remind people, it's as if, it isn't that there's this sovereign state, and I'm very wary of the examples that I give, a sovereign state that attacks another sovereign state and you're at war. And I add that in because part of the challenge of the framing right now is that Hamas, on the one hand, as a hybrid terror organization, took over the Gaza Strip, but it does not only exist in the Gaza Strip, it exists both in Judea and Samaria, and in Jerusalem, and in Lebanon, and in additional areas. Okay, Hamas, and we know of Qatar or in Turkey. But in addition, but they're perceived, they are a terror organization, and they're perceived, and it's a term, as a non-state actor. And those terms that we use of the asymmetry are used extensively by Hamas, meaning that they're a non-state actor because they aspire to a state in which Israel is annihilated, but they don't say that. But they're a non-state actor, so they're the oppressed. They're the resistance against Israel, the state actor. And you and I may not see it that way, but overwhelmingly in the world, and even myself, I say they're a non-state actor, but they're a hybrid organization because they already ruled over the Gaza Strip for over 15 years. So it's a very challenging kind of framing that they use in the media, and that can give us also that term when we look at the younger generation and how they come on out and say the most ridiculous aspects. And Professor Boaz Ganol, the establisher of the Institute for Counterterrorism, now he's the president of Reichman University, wrote in the last few weeks a little op-ed, go out and see, and it's it's about the good-natured fools or the good-natured idiots, meaning it's the ones who want to do the right thing. And what's the right thing? To be with the oppressed against the oppressor. And so you actually, and you said this before yourself, there's this enormous ignorance, but that ignorance is sitting on the terminology and the framing. So the terminology and the framing matter, and you need to step into it to be able to break it. If you just give it as an alternative, usually it's going to be pushed away. If we have time, I would just add in one more aspect, but I don't know, do we have time?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And then I have just one last question for you as well.
Okay, so one additional aspect that I haven't spoken about, and it's worth expanding perhaps another time, is the impact of the narrative that I was talking about, of resistance, of power, of look at humiliating the Israelis to the greater Arabic-speaking and Muslim world. Because in this case, you can say success and absolute non-success. We always look at the places where it's working hard. So where has their success been? The Houthis. And I'm not saying that's not a success, but that means Iran told the Houthis to act, okay? Meaning Iran wanted to show that they're doing something, and Hamas said, come join us. So they sent Hezbollah to do their war of attrition and the Houthis to do what the Houthis can from Yemen and a bit here and there. But take notice, yes, there's enormous public attention, but even in Jordan, even in Egypt, let alone in the Emirates, Arabia, etc., it has not changed any of the governments, meaning they all need to acknowledge their streets in acknowledging, again, the victims, the numbers of victims, but none of them, okay, until now, have really changed policies. The only one that I personally look at, and I'm worried about in that sense, I think that Hamas's biggest media manipulation, biggest success is in the large country to the northwest of us called Turkey. That is a country of 95 closing into 100 million Sunnis, and it's overwhelmingly a Sunni country. There you can see that it really had an impact, and it's a very adverse impact when it comes to how you can feel both safe inside Turkey at all, but to what Hamas wanted to achieve. They wanted to bring everybody out. They wanted them to join on in. They've had very limited success. The anti-Semitism came on the back of anti-Semitism. And that's something that we're going to need to explore another time.
So definitely looking around the world at these different countries and really the impact that both the massacre had, that the war is having, that the propaganda war is having, whether it be Turkey, as you quite rightly said, where we've had a stormy relationship with Turkey for the last probably 20 years, on and off, friends and really enemies. Similar with our neighbors with whom we have peace. Egypt, on the one hand, who were clearly either involved or oblivious to the fact that Hamas was using tunnels underneath the Rafah crossing in order to smuggle in weapons, in order to smuggle in huge machines to dig big tunnels, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, Jordan, and really that whole diatribe of Queen Rania, questioning whether there were even rapes, questioning the nature and the brutality of the Hamas attack and the terrorists, and you see that both sides really paying to their local populations. The question which I really would like to get into with, but I feel we don't have time, so I'll just mention it quickly. If you a quick response, how do you explain the fact that I understand that people want to associate with the oppressed, with the victims, but how do you explain the fact that it was so quick that all of these different organizations, media outlets, so quickly forgot how so many Israelis had been so terribly and brutally murdered, and were immediately on the other side picking up pictures of the poor Palestinians? There isn't even a side here of telling the story of the victims. It's just one-sided of Palestinian victims and well, Israelis can move on. We hear it within the UN organizations. Everyone's talking about in the UN organizations the displaced Palestinians within Gaza. No one's talking about the 200,000 internally displaced Israelis who have been really frightened away, sent away, murdered, and then forced away from their homes because of the violence that's going on, whether it be in the north or in the south. That change was just very quick for me.
I didn't see the changes being quick. I'm going to say that at your center, I think that you also have had lots of different thinking groups that have looked at that this is something very long term, that we've all been on board for many, many years about this delegitimizing of Israel that enabled and allowed, as it developed and evolved into the world of the oppression, the oppressed, the white, the colonial, all sorts of other terms. So in that sense, it has had an evolution. But I'm going to end by saying that for the media, the traditional media, it's the knee-jerk reaction. It's the knee-jerk reaction. They felt bad for the victims of Israel, and then they went on to feel bad for the victims of the other side. And I'm like, we're still victims. But again, and I state this clearly, I don't like to think of myself as a victim, as an Israeli. We're strong, we're resilient, we're fighting back, we're going to win this war, and that's part of who I am. And to a certain degree, the media recognize that. So they go to the ones who call themselves victims. I'm not willing to pose as a victim when I am out to go and destroy the Hamas terrorist genocidal organization.
One of the clear disadvantages that we have is obviously the statement attributed often to Mark Twain that a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth even puts its boots on, and that also I think is an integral part of this propaganda war between Israel and Hamas and the terrorists. They can say whatever they want. They have no degree of reliability to start with. And so the media will just take anything they want. But if, God forbid, an Israeli spokesman says something which is even marginally incorrect, that has long-term consequences. Unfortunately, we have so many more things to discuss. We have questions from one of our regular viewers, from Brian Gore, talking about the developments today in the UN Security Council. But unfortunately, that we'll have to save for another time if you'll agree to come back and join us again, Miri. But for now, our time has ended. We are at the end of another, I believe, fascinating journey into better understanding the war that's going on. Never leaving just one side of the equation, but really having to delve into what's going on a multifaceted levels. And so thank you, Miri, for being with us and for explaining and really providing us with both the context and the analysis that I think is so critical that so many more people hear and understand. So thank you again for joining us. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us around the world. We will be back with you again tomorrow at 4 o'clock Israel time. In the meantime, stay safe. And as Miri said, Israel will win this war because we have, as Golda Meir famously said, we just have